Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Door County. And I just have to say, after emerging from our little mini hibernation of the last 48 hours, it was really wonderful to just see everybody kind of congregating and socializing over the last 10, 15 minutes as we got ready to start our service. I am Marianne O'Dowd, a member of this fellowship and your service leader today. And I'd like to extend a special welcome to our new pianist, Sandy Badar. This is a community in which people of many backgrounds can gather in mutual care and respect. We know you come here for different reasons: to find community, to seek spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore ideas, or to simply find comfort and warmth on a snowy Sunday morning. And for that, we are grateful and give thanks. Please silence your devices if you haven't already done so. If you're visiting us for the first time or for the first time in a while, please introduce yourself if you're comfortable doing so we can extend a special welcome. And we will start on my right. Just anybody wants to stand up, say anything? Hello. Hi. Welcome. Anyone else? All right. Well, everyone is invited to join us for coffee and conversation in the gathering room after today's service. And then after about 15 minutes, we'll regroup here for our talkback session with today's speaker, Reverend Barb Sina. Reverend Sina has served as the rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Sister Bay for more than 15 years. And she's been recognized for her gifts as a preacher and a teacher, as well as for her congregational leadership. And before her ordination, she was a practicing attorney. You can find out more about her in the back of your order, or in your order of service, and you'll hear from Reverend Sina in just a moment. And before we get to announcements, remember that today's service is broadcast on YouTube Live and is being recorded. So right now, I'd like you to take a moment, check out the announcements in your order of service. And if you have any announcements related to this fellowship or any of its members, please feel free to raise your hand and the microphone will find you.
So today would be a sad day. It is, but it's so beautiful outside, it makes up for it. It's time to take down the holiday decorations. But nature has decorated for us, so it'll be a little less bittersweet. Karen is unable to make it today. She's normally our leader in things of holiday decor. But I have bins and I've been around a few times. I can help out with that. So if you see a bin next to a piece of holiday decor, feel free to put that decor in that bin. Thank you so much for the teamwork.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, let us now begin our service. At this time, I will light our chalice and read opening words adapted from Right Here, Right Now by Ella Boyer. As we create and share sacred space together, let us reflect upon what brings us here. Some believe we are here for a greater purpose. Others hold fast to a claim of complete coincidence. Others still lie somewhere in between. There are so many differences and barriers between each individual. It would seem at times as though the odds were stacked against us, becoming one whole. As we believe different things, live and experience different things, and value and hate different things. We all have different definitions and explanations to who or what and why we are. Perhaps all are right. Our revelation is not sealed. Despite all that is different, there is one thing that is certainly the same. Somehow, we are all right here, right now. Let us change and fight together. Let us adapt together. Let us grow together. Let us worship together. Please join in singing our, reciting our unison affirmation and our doxology. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. All that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung, in every land, by every tongue. Now is the time in the service where you may briefly share any joys that filled your heart or concerns that weigh heavily on you. And keep in mind, the service is recorded and saved for future viewing. So if you haven't received permission from anybody you wish to speak about, please don't do so. Anybody have anything?
My joy is that this week, God willing, and the drug lords don't rise in Ecuador again, Jackie Polson and I are going to Galapagos for a week. So I expect to be back with a sunburn and some good photos.
Hi. So I have a concern. This week I had a biopsy on a mass on my kidney and it turned out cancerous. And so the journey begins. I'll let you know.
Anyone else? Okay. We will now have this morning's offering and to support this community and the work that we do. So. Let us take a moment of silence to clear our minds and get in a space for receiving today's message. So normally at this time, I or our speaker would do a reading, and we have a reading today, but Reverend Sina and I both felt it was best delivered by the originator of these very powerful words. So we have a special speaker.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the hiking Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Those are such incredibly powerful words. I'm just going to start with just something bouncing off what Marianne said. Usually people struggle with my last name. Except that she's not the only person who has called me Bob. I have a British son-in-law, and apparently they don't do R's. And so he calls me Bob. So I'm happy to be with you again this morning. It's always a privilege to be here with you. And when Sarah is much more efficient than I am, and so she asks us for the title of your sermon, usually before the sermon is written. And so I came up with the title called The Problem with Prophets. But as I was working on this, I decided a better title would have been The Challenges Around Prophets. Because when I thought about it, the prophet, him or herself, is only one part of the picture. There are other issues as well. There's the prophet, but there's also the challenge to those who hear the prophet or refuse to hear the prophet. And then there are the challenges around the message itself. So this morning, I'd like us to think about all of this, to think about the prophet and the message and the challenge to people who are listening. So first, the prophet. I think there's a popular misconception that prophets are like fortune tellers. But what they are instead is more like an early warning system. They're people who look around at the world and say, this isn't right. So I know all of us are of a certain age, but there are some younger people here. Do you all remember the books that Bellman wrote about Madeline, the 12 little girls in 2 straight lines that lived in Paris? Okay. Some of you do, some of you don't. Okay, you're missing out. Anyway, Miss Clavel was the one who was in charge of them, and she would wake up in the night and say something is not right. Remember that? Okay. So, although she said it in French, so yeah. Prophets take their understanding of the world as God intended it to be, and then they look at what is actually happening in the world, and then they say, look, this is what is supposed to be happening, but instead, this is what is really going on. And if you continue to live this way, you are heading for disaster. So as I said, more like an early warning system. So later, we'll hear a section from Isaiah, the Old Testament prophet, later. But here's something that he said also. This is setting out that vision of God. Behold, I'm creating a new heavens and a new earth. Former things shall no more be remembered, nor shall they be called to mind. Weeping and cries for help shall never again be heard. People shall build houses and live to inhabit them, plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not toil in vain or raise children for misfortune. It's a vision of peace. And not just peace in the sense of absence of warfare, but peace in the Jewish sense of shalom, which is a situation of social wholeness, a state of well-being for everyone, where everyone has access to the goods of creation that were intended to meet the needs of all, where there is justice and security for the entire community. That's the starting point for the prophet. That's the vision. And then comes the question, how are we measuring up? So, not surprisingly, prophets are not universally welcomed. So they're asking for change, and sometimes they're asking for really radical change. So it's not surprising that they're not welcomed. And it's interesting to note that the usual response, and I'm bouncing back and forth between King and the Old Testament prophets, the usual response to the invitation to be a prophet is, "What? Are you talking to me?" um, Thanks, but no thanks. And then they trot out all of these excuses. I'm too young, or I'm too old, or I don't speak well enough. I think Moses even had a stutter, I read somewhere. Or in Martin Luther King's case, it was, actually, I had other plans for my life. I planned to go back and get my PhD. So all these excuses. But then there are other reasons as well, like, you know what? Nobody's going to listen to me anyway. And besides that, I'm going to be persecuted. I went to seminary at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And obviously, given the name, Cynthia Johnson was there too. Our paths didn't cross there, which was amazing. But anyway, a lot of people, most people from all denominations, but as you might imagine, most of them were Methodist. So I don't know if this is a part of Methodist theology, but very often you would hear people say, I think I'm called to be a prophet. Quite unlike the standard that I just laid out, where people say, I don't think so. Ask Al. Instead, to name yourself as a prophet is really coming at it quite from a different direction. And I remember someone saying quite wryly that, being a prophet was not an easy path. And if you did become a prophet, you better look good on wood. Yeah. And then there's the problem of the message itself. In the Old Testament, the prophet Amos said that without a vision, the people would perish. That's the vision that the prophet set out, whether it's Dr. King's dream or Isaiah's peaceable kingdom. But often, depending on where you're standing, the message is either welcome or not very palatable at all, because the vision is one of universal love, spiritual freedom, and total inclusiveness, where everyone has a place simply because they are a child of God. So it's a vision really of an ever-widening circle. But I think, to be honest, we often come from a different vision. Our vision is often much narrower. We fear that inclusive circle, and we seem to instead prefer drawing lines that are more defining and exclusive, lines based on race, color, gender, economics, ethnicity, so that lines, as I say, that are much more exclusive, lines between black and white, between men and women, between rich and poor, between educated and ignorant, between powerful and powerless. And we see these groups in tension with one another, and struggling with one another. And Martin Luther King saw that as being false. One might even say a kind of a sin, that kind of thinking. What he said is the tension is not between the races. The tension is at bottom between justice and injustice, between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. So King was working for a community characterized by love. And when I was at St. Luke's, I guess I must have talked about love a lot. I don't know. Well, it's a good thing to talk about, right? And finally, one parishioner came up to me and he said, so you talk about love all the time, but you never say what it is. And I said, Okay, you just need to listen better because I. But I think we get caught in the bill of goods that Hollywood has sold us, that love is about romance or emotional, good feeling. Actually, love is the recognition of the fact that we are all connected and the action that flows from the recognition that we are connected. So King, talking about that, he said, love means understanding, redemptive goodwill. Agape love in the Greek is an overflowing love, which is spontaneous, unmotivated, groundless, and creative. It's not set in motion by any quality or function of the object. It's the love of God operating in the human heart, a love in which the individual seeks not his own good, but the good of the other. That's the message, not only from Dr. King, but from biblical prophets throughout history. So here's the other challenge then. How is this message received? The challenge to the listener. I think the first and most valid question a listener has is this: is the person who is purporting to be a prophet, purporting to be speaking the word of God, is the person really doing so? So, in other words, there are false prophets as well as true prophets. So, how are we supposed to tell the difference? And that's an age-old question. One answer, which frankly is not very satisfactory at all, is that if what the prophet talks about actually happens, well, that meant they were a true prophet. But again, that's not helpful because that's after the fact. So, a better guide, I think, is whether the person is simply telling those in power what they want to hear, or whether whatever the prophet's saying is going to redound to his or her own benefit. And then I think there is the test when we're listening to the vision, whether it speaks to our own deepest hopes and desires. So, truth is the key issue here. And I remember when I was in law school and I went to Madison, and the entryway carved into the stone had that quote from the Gospel of John, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And I hadn't been practicing law very long when I said to one of my colleagues, I can't believe how naive I was even at that age, but I said to one of my colleagues, this would all be a lot easier if everybody just told the truth. Uh, uh, and his reply to me was, well, you'd be out of a job. Talk about self-interest, right? But thinking about that later, I thought, actually, that's not right. Even if everybody tried to tell the truth, there would still be issues of memory or perspective or bias or confusion. So lawyers would still have jobs. So I told the Bar Association that and they relaxed. So truth then and the power of words. In the Hebrew, the word for word is dabar, and it is not a noun, but it's a verb. So because there's a sense that words have power. So to go back to the prophets, when they talked about being called to be a prophet, they said, the word of God happened to me. So it is the recognition that words can create a reality. We haven't lost that completely, even though we're inundated by words, but we still have a sense of that. For instance, when I say to someone, I love you, that word is actually creating a reality. But I'm going to say, and this isn't probably going to be a surprise to you, that I think we're living in a time when truth is being often lost in the shuffle, where there's a lot of spin, but even more destructive, there's a lot of outright lying. Rather than using words to communicate truth, words are often used to miscommunicate, to obfuscate, to confuse, or to excite and inflame passions. In all of that, the truth can be hard to find. In fact, sometimes it seems to me, if you look at conversations, that the truth is really beside the point. Part of that is our current political situation. But part of it also is, I think, because we lived in what's called a postmodern world, which encourages us to think that there is no objective truth at all, only one's opinion or one's point of view. And my opinion is as good as yours, might even be better, Um, and all of this reminds me of several quotes. Mark Twain is one. And I remember when I read this, he said, if you can fake sincerity, you've got it made. Or Groucho Marx saying, these are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others. And while those are humorous, less humorous is the Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels. And he said, we do not talk to say something, but to create an effect. And we know the effects that they were able to create. But the biblical view of truth is that it's ultimate. We may not, as fragile human beings, ever get it completely, but it's a reality. There is an objective truth. And here's something else about the prophetic message. Depending upon where you're situated, this is good news or bad news. So if things are going fine for you, the invitation to a radical change might not be all that welcome. And you remember that King's message got a lot of pushback. There were pushback from Blacks who thought he was going too fast, pushback from Blacks who thought he was going too slow, pushback from whites who were doing fine, thank you, and didn't think any change was necessary. But that aside, I would just propose to you that I think there is a deeper human resistance. And I think that it's based on a number of fears. We're often afraid of strangers, of people who are different from us. We're fearful, I think, that if they're different from us, if they're racially, economically different, they'll see and do things differently than we do. They might have a different value system and they won't understand us, and then we won't be safe with them. I think that is underlying. And then also, I think because we're aware of our own fragility and vulnerability, we want to protect ourselves and our families. And the individualism, which is rampant in our culture, tells us to make every effort to be self-sufficient, to take care of our own. And that flies in the face of that interconnectedness that love is, or the kind of community that King is talking about. And then there's the fear of scarcity, that if we share whatever it is, power, influence, education, we'll be putting ourselves or our children at a disadvantage, and there really won't be enough to go around. And I would say often that has been our experience. It can seem like there's never enough time or money or affection or attention or sympathy or talent, whatever. And I remember this so graphically when my older daughter, they had a little girl who was 5, and a new baby was coming. And as an older child, I can still relate to this. Anyway, she was really anxious about this new baby coming because she was old enough to realize that she was going to have to share the love and the attention. And at the time, I saw a New Yorker cartoon that showed a 4-year-old opening the door to his mom and dad and the new baby and saying, "I hope you remembered the return receipt." Any other older children here? I think we all can sympathize. All of this means that even though we all know deep down that the prophet's message is true, we are still tempted to resist the change necessary to make it a reality. So I'd like to close with a story from the rabbinic tradition. It goes that a rabbi was surrounded by his students, and he asked them when it was possible to tell night from day. So one guy raises his hand. He said, "Could it be when you see an animal in the distance and you can tell whether it's a sheep or a dog?" Now, That's not it, says the rabbi. And another one said, well, how about when you look at a tree in the distance and you can tell whether it's a fig tree or a peach tree? No, was the answer again. Well, then, demanded the students, when is it? And here's the answer. It is when you look on the face of any man or woman and you see that he or she is your brother or sister. Because if you cannot do that, then no matter what time it is still night. And when we can finally do that, all of us, no matter what color or gender or economic status, all of us will be able to say with Dr. King that we are free at last. Amen.
Please join in singing hymn number 318, We Would Be One. Thank you, Barb, for today's message. And thank you, Sandy, for the beautiful music and for joining us. And thanks to everyone here for showing your true Northern Wisconsin grit and coming out today. So before our closing words, remember to join us back here for the talkback session at about 15 minutes, after about 15 minutes of coffee and catching up. Today's closing words, as Barb mentioned, is from Isaiah 11, 8-9. On that day, the wolf shall live with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze. Their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord and the waters as the waters cover the sea.